the director of Julie is the director of business development for the Bristol Assisted Living, has dedicated her 25-year career to supporting and enhancing quality of life for older adults. She's worked in an array of settings, including government-funded senior centers, the New York City Department for the Aging, adult daycare programs, and in senior living for the past 8 years. She's dedicated to ensuring that all older adults, regardless of advancing age, live healthy, active, purposeful, meaningful, and social lives. She will discuss the continuum of care that is available for older adults. Julie?
Thank you so much, Gloria. Time goes fast. It's actually 10 years now working in senior living. Yes.
Oh, okay.
So thank you so much, everyone, for having us this evening. I'm always delighted to, share this information. Even having done this for 30 years, I never take for granted that people have this information, right? How are you to know, right? This is the first generation really in the history of humanity that has lived as long as they have. And with that come a lot of new challenges and new questions and new ways of thinking. And so when you come to webinars like this and you get, information, it's just, it's just powerful. So I'm glad everyone's here this evening. So I wanted to talk today about moving when you're a senior, moving when you're an older adult. When is the right time to move? There is no perfect answer, right? And for a lot of life decisions that we make, there's no perfect answer. But I always feel that there's two main things we need to think about when we're thinking or considering making a move. And those two things that should always be in the forefront are safety and also quality of life. All right, I'm gonna see if I can get the slide to move. Hold on one second. Oops, I'm so sorry. Let's try that again because I was having trouble getting the slide to move. So I'm hitting, oh, there we go. Okay, so other things to think about when you're thinking about maybe moving from a home that you might have lived in for decades. The fact of the matter is we're all getting older, and however much we would like to maintain our health, sometimes that doesn't happen. And the time may come because of either physical or cognitive decline that we're no longer able to drive, which can lead to somebody possibly being socially isolated, more difficulty getting to doctor's appointments, more difficulty, just seeing friends, things like that. And so it might be time to sort of simplify your life or to live someplace where everything is all under one roof, where driving maybe isn't just a part of how you live your daily life, which is a big change, especially for us Long Islanders, right? But another thing to think about, in terms of considering moving is whether there's, possibly some cognitive decline or memory loss. We can't have this conversation about aging without acknowledging a very sobering statistic, which is that when we're 65 years old, we have a 10% chance of having some sort of diagnosable memory loss or cognitive decline or mild cognitive impairment. By the time we are 85, so in those 20 years from 65 to 85, by the time we're 85, it is 1 in 2. So 50% of people will have some sort of diagnosable memory loss. Once again, the population is living longer, and perhaps the Center Hall Colonial you bought back in 1970 is not a safe and appropriate place for you to live. Possibly there's increased social isolation, right? Because your friends are unfortunately passing away or moving away, and it's hard to get to the senior center, it's hard to get to the church, it's hard to get to the JCC. And so you might choose to move to be in a more social situation. Perhaps preparing meals and shopping for meals is getting more difficult, so you're not eating well. And also meals tend to be a social, it's not just the nutrition that you take in, but it's also a social activity. So perhaps you're not eating well, or perhaps there's a history of dehydration. Perhaps there's just increased health concerns that need to be better monitored and managed, or medication errors, a history of falls, maybe the home is no longer safe. Perhaps there is a caregiver involved, so maybe an adult child or perhaps a spouse who has taken on the role of being the caregiver, and it's a lot. It's a lot to take care of an older adult who has very complex health needs. And so perhaps for quality of life for both individuals, there needs to be a consideration of a move. Or maybe you just want to be proactive. It's always better to make a move when you're healthy and it's not in a time of crisis, right? I know people don't just wake up in the morning and say, you know what, I think I'm going to go take a look at that assisted living. Now, typically people start looking at assisted living when the crisis happens. But the message really is that if we can learn what our options are and have those conversations, sometimes difficult conversations with our families, with our children, with our spouses, with our friends, and tell them what our wishes and desires are and educate ourselves, then we'll be in a much more powerful situation. So as Gloria was saying early on, we are very fortunate to be living in a time where there are a lot more options for senior living, right? So whatever you're thinking is assisted living, get that out of your mind. This is not the old age home of yesteryear, right? People, you hear assisted living and I think our minds automatically go to that, sort of, stereotypical old age home where everybody's sitting around and, wheelchairs and maybe knitting. We do have knitting though, at the Bristol. But really there's a lot more options because once again, these are the baby boomers now who are getting into those later decades, and they have much different expectations, and a variety of healthcare needs and expectations about what their quality of life is going to be. And so with that, we have a lot more options. So you might perhaps choose to move to a 55 and over. I think the average age in a 55 and over is like 80. People might move when they're 55. I don't know. I'm 54, so maybe I'm going to get ready to make my move to a 55 and over next year. But they're typically just, it could be an apartment, they're rental communities, or they might be for purchase. And there's many of them on Long Island. Actually, the Bristol are developers, are also developers of Sutton Landing, which you may have heard of, which is a 55 and over rental, or perhaps you've heard of the Seasons. So they are a 55 and over for purchase community. And they're really just usually gated. Usually there's a clubhouse, and it's just nice to be living amongst peers, where there might be some organized activities, and just, people who, you have share things in common with and might participate in activities with. Independent living. So independent living communities are typically apartments where you might get, meals, activities, but you're not getting any kind of personal care assistance. So we actually have a sister community called Encore Luxury Living, which is up in Jericho. And there's a few of them on Long Island, but those are independent living communities. If the time comes that you need more help, where we have assisted living, of course, which is the Bristol Assisted Living. And we actually have 16 communities on Long Island. And it's really apartment style living where all those kind of challenges that I was talking about before are kind of solved when you move to assisted living. Why? Because we're preparing 3 meals a day for you. So you no longer have to cook and go grocery shopping. The doctors have office hours right in the communities. Your socialization is taken care of because you're living in a community with your peers. And so all the challenges of living at home kind of are resolved when you move to an assisted living community. Where you have your own private apartment, but you also have, the support that you need. If you have some more significant memory loss, you might go into a memory neighborhood that we call Reflections. So that's really going to be for somebody who needs a smaller, more structured, more supportive environment, special staff training for folks with memory loss. Moving along that continuum is a skilled nursing facility, otherwise known as a nursing home. Now, somebody might go to a skilled nursing facility or a nursing home for short-term rehab. Typically, that happens if somebody has to go to the hospital and they have a short hospital stay. Older adults tend to decondition very quickly. So just those 2 or 3 days of being in the hospital can actually require you to go to rehab to get stronger before you have to go home. but that's different than going to a nursing home for long-term care. So that's really going to be somebody who has, 24-hour skilled nursing needs. In assisted living, actually, our licensing is such that we could provide a pretty high level of care. So, assisted living is always going to be a less restrictive environment. A nursing home is going to be a more clinical setting. Assisted living is going to be more like living in a hotel with services. So you always you want to think about, even if you think, oh, mom needs a nursing home, to consider assisted living first to see if that might be suitable and that if they can meet their needs. Every assisted living is licensed a little bit differently, so that's always something to look into. Another thing to think about is a continuing care retirement community, or a CCRC. There's a few of them on Long Island where it's basically all, the independent living, assisted living, memory care, and skilled nursing all on the same campus. The difference is it's sort of a large buy-in. So you might, and on Long Island, the buy-ins can be upwards of like $750,000, but your estate gets most of that money back when you move out or when you pass. So it can be, for some people, a good investment and could be a good option for them. There are obstacles to moving. We know that moving is stressful. We know it's considered one of the most stressful life events. Leaving your home can be emotional. There's, of course, financial concerns to think about, what to do with all the stuff. Moving, people think, oh, I'm moving from a 4-bedroom house. How can I move to an apartment in an assisted living? Well, remember, you're not moving just to that apartment. You're eating your meals in the dining room. There's a movie theater, there's a hair salon, there's a library, there's a bistro. Like, you have access to all the wonderful amenities that we have at the Bristol. People are concerned often about losing their independence when they move to assisted living. And I see it really as the opposite. If you're relying on your daughter to do everything for you, to go to the grocery store, to manage your day-to-day life, to take you to the doctor, that's not independence. People actually become more independent when they move to our community, because we're taking on the burden of a lot of those things that you can no longer do, right? So we really need to change the way that we think about senior living, as I mentioned before. And moving can be a positive thing. It could be new beginnings. It can mean increased safety and security. You can mean a more social life, and it's peace of mind. And it's not only peace of mind for the person who's moving, but peace of mind for your family. So my dad actually lives out of Bristol in New Jersey, and I can tell you that it was really life-changing for him not to have to worry about the burden of the house. And for my sisters and I, we know that my dad ate his 3 meals a day, that he's around other people. And you know what? If we don't hear from him for a couple of days, we know that everything's okay, because if God forbid something was wrong, we would be getting a call from the assisted living. This is our lobby at the Bristol in North Woodmere. So right up the road from all of you, and down on the South Shore, you can see it's beautiful, luxurious. It's like a cruise ship, right? Beautiful home-like spaces to enjoy your day. So you can see these are the other picture was the Bristol at West Babylon. I believe that's the Bristol at Garden City. As I mentioned before, we have a memory neighborhood in all of our communities for with specially trained staff, special design of the community. Everything that we do is designed to support people with memory loss, from the way that we serve the meal, the activities, the way that we provide care. It's a fully and secured environment, and safety is always our top priority. So when you're moving to assisted living, it can be difficult. Bring things from home. You want to make sure that you create an environment that's going to be welcoming, to the individual. For the sake of time, I'm going to skip over some of these things, but these are our happy faces of some of our residents at the Bristol at North Woodmere. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike, who's going to talk a little bit more about the specifics of making a move.
Excellent, Julie. Thank you. The last time I shared my screen, I had my taxes up. So let's hope I can avoid that this time. So my name is Mike McClernand. My service is called Assisted Living Locators of Long Island, part of a national company, and we help people find the right sort of senior living. There are on Long Island about 90 assisted living, independent living, and memory care communities in total. And they all offer something a little bit different. So I help people navigate that. And the communities pay my fees, so I'm free to work with. So Julie had a good slide. It was the continuum of services. And that was one slide for her. My program is going to be, my presentation is going to be elaborate on that, talking a little bit more detail about all the places that serve seniors, from senior centers all the way through to what we used to call nursing homes, we now call long-term care facilities. I'm gonna cover day programs, home care, and homemaking, which is where a lot of people stop. You know, if they can get help in and out of the bed, help showering, maybe help with some meals, that's all they need, and they can pass at home just with home care. So each of these involves fewer and fewer people, right? Senior centers can serve everyone. Day program is a senior center for people with dementia. We've talked about homemaking. There was 2 excellent presentations on that. And then we start to talk about communities, facilities, places, 55 plus communities all the way through long-term care facilities. 30 seconds on my own background, how I started doing this work. We promised our parents, my sisters and I, that we'd never put them in a home, which is the term that people in my parents' generation use for any sort of facility that serves seniors. And for my father, we were able to do that very nicely. He passed at home under hospice, people were around. It was just a classic peaceful death. My mother's dementia, though, related to her Parkinson's, really kind of blossomed after he passed, and she was setting fires in the kitchen. It was just dangerous, right? Dangerous for the other people in the house, and of course, dangerous to her. So we had to place her. And it didn't go that well. And she was never really settled, never really happy. Sometimes the particular dementia that affects a lot of people with Parkinson's, it leaves them with a sense that something's not right. You know, it is a particular kind of dementia, and they know where they kind of know where they're at, and they know it's not where they want to be. So she never really settled. And I just said, gosh, maybe I could help one family in the future, maybe a cousin, for example, just make a slower, more discerning decision about how to help their parents when they get older. And it turned out I could do it for a living. So that's what I do now. On Long Island, there are, minimize my picture here. On Long Island, there are about 75 private commercial assisted living businesses. Bristol is one. I think they have the most communities. Atria, Sunrise are also large chains, large businesses on Long Island. And then there are others that have 1 or 2 or 3 places on Long Island. Medicaid does cover assisted living. It doesn't cover it for everyone. So it's designed for the most able seniors, and it is not appropriate for seniors with dementia. So that said, there are about 10 places that accept Medicaid for part of the cost of assisted living. Independent living has about 8 buildings, communities that on Long Island. So assisted is far, far more common than anything else. And then there are 5 buildings on Long Island, 5 communities that are memory care only. So on Long Island, there are 1,500, 2,000 spots that serve seniors with dementia. They're all pretty full. Some of them are starting wait lists, some are starting wait lists for particular kinds of departments. And assisted living is roughly 10,000 beds. And there are about 275,000 seniors on Long Island, people above age 70. So there's not a lot of beds, and there's a growing population of seniors. The whole post-war, post-Korean War generation, even post-Vietnam War generation are now looking for their next step. Here are the costs. Private home care, it varies, but it's gone up quite a bit in the last few years. I've seen it in the $31, $32 an hour range, and it's now at 35 or 36. Jen and Megan maybe can put into the chat what the current rates are for private home care, but that's generally in the $35 an hour range. Medicaid assisted living is not free. Medicaid pays for the care, and the family or the senior pays for the rent, the room and board. The room and board is about $13.13 a month. It might be a little bit different, but it's in that range. Independent living, it's all private pay. There's no insurance of any sort accepted there in those buildings. They're $5,000 to $10,000 a month. Private assisted living like Bristol, Sunrise, Atria, others can be, I guess there are a couple at 6,000. Usually they're going to be in the 7 to 10 range. Memory care, and memory care is simply assisted living for people with dementia. That's all it is. All the same physical services plus some comfort, higher staffing ratio, and just a higher level of experience with people with dementia. That can be $8,000. There's one place that once in a while has a $6,500 apartment, but it's expensive, and they can go up to over $12,000. And the nursing home is typically paid for, if you've organized yourself right, is typically paid for by a kind of Medicaid called chronic Medicaid. If you don't have that and you're paying privately, it can be $500 to $600 a day. Here's how people pay for senior living. Of course, their current income. Seniors have income. They have Social Security, they have pensions, they have annuity, they have mandatory payouts from 401ks. So they have income, savings, they have sale of life insurance, which is very common. 90% of all insurance policies don't pay out. The death benefit isn't received because people simply stop paying when they get older. So a sale of a life insurance policy is a great way to get some value out of a whole life type policy, not a term policy. Long-term care insurance can be a godsend. It can pay most or even all of the cost of certain kinds of senior housing, but it's not something most people have. Of course, on Long Island, people who bought right in the 70s, 80s, have homes now that have appreciated. So sometimes the last 5 or 10 years of a senior's life can be funded really by the sale of their home. There are some veterans benefits that pay for assisted living type services. Medicaid can pay certainly for long-term care facilities. And then there's a New York State voucher program for dementia, which is pretty interesting. After a year of paying privately, but only in certain communities, New York State will pay for part of the cost under certain circumstances for people who are living in private pay dementia neighborhoods. So just to run through the continuum real quickly, I'm sure most of you know that senior centers provide fun, active services, typically a meal. Typically there's little or no cost. It's companionship, it's fun. Day programs are parts, but not often. They're sometimes separate services. Sometimes they're part of a senior center, but a day program is a program specifically for people with dementia. Now, sometimes seniors can go there and they're mobile and they can toilet correctly and they just have a pleasant day doing simple activities. There are a couple of medical model day programs, though, that can handle people with quite significant problems. So you aren't limited, you aren't excluded from a day program simply because you're in a wheelchair or you have other significant problems. There are a couple of medical model programs that can handle this, and in some you can get Medicaid, Medicare, private insurance, other folks to pay for at least part of the cost. Independent living, I think Julie covered that. It's more of an arm. It's closer to assisted living than it is to 55 plus. So independent living communities, they do have kitchens and they don't have a wellness department. So they don't have nurses and aides who work for the building. Now, many of them have figured that out and they help people access care of aides in the building. Right at Home is particularly active in that area. So they'll provide, and I'm going to get this wrong, and Megan, you're free to go off mute correctly. It's care by the minute or something very close to that. And sometimes people to live in independent living, all they need is help with a shower. That's the most common thing. So Right at Home will come in and for 30 minutes a day, 3 times a week, they'll provide shower assistance and allow people to live in these independent living communities. There are only about 8 on Long Island, and people like the kitchens. They like the more active environment there. Those can be $3,500 to $10,000 a month. Assisted living is the most common type of supportive housing for people who are seniors. The assistance, how's the name come up? The word assistance means assistance with the activities of daily living. So it's ambulation, eating, toileting, showering, dressing, and there's one more, I think. They have apartments typically. Some are very simple, and it's just a a simple studio, a simple room. Others have 2 and even 3-bedroom apartments, and they have, and Julie went over this. One thing I did want to mention though is that physicians and therapists come into the assisted living, they can provide the needed therapy. So the number of times the person has to go out and get to the doctor is reduced in assisted living pretty dramatically. Memory care is simply assisted living for people with dementia. People with dementia have a problem with their brain, right? And the brain controls the body. So as dementia progresses, and every kind of dementia is a progressive disease, the person's ability to control their legs, speech, swallowing, other activities, other bodily functions, it's reduced. So people in a memory care part of assisted living, a neighborhood, they need all the assisted living services, the physical services, plus they need activities and care, interaction from people who are specially trained to help them. Memory care is fairly expensive on Long Island. It starts at about $6,500 and easily go to $10,000, $12,000 a month. I think the average cost on Long Island is between $9,000 and $10,000 a month. Medicaid funded senior living. There are 2 ways that Medicaid funds life in a facility, not at home. They do fund that, and we have some experts on to talk about that. But there are 2 ways that Medicaid funds assisted living and, of course, long-term care facility. Medicaid pays for assisted living. The places they fund are modest. You know, they're not the luxurious apartments or common spaces that Julie showed earlier. They're modest, but for people who have modest needs and don't have significant physical needs, whose cognition is good, these can be lifesavers, frankly. It's especially seniors who are alone and just to have no one to take care of them. For the cost of their Social Security check, less $200. That's in that's the fundamental cost of the room and board in these facilities. So it can be a great thing. It's only community Medicaid. Community Medicaid, as many of you probably know, is what's used for home care. It's also what's used for a Medicaid assisted living facility. And the look back period is still zero times, 0 months for Medicaid, community Medicaid. If you need to use a nursing home, a long-term care facility, it's much more expensive. The Medicaid is different. It's called chronic Medicaid, used to be called institutional Medicaid, and the look back is 5 years. So the best advice relative to preparing for an older part of your life is to make sure that you understand if you can access Medicaid, how to access Medicaid. Even people with income and resources can still, in some cases, receive Medicaid. So an elder care attorney can help you with that. And Jamie, I think, is probably our next speaker, so she's going to talk about that in detail. And long-term care facilities, $18,000 a month. If you need medical services delivered by a medical professional, that's where you need to be. If you need services delivered mainly by aides, then typically assisted living is a safe and happy place for you. And Gloria has my contact information. That's it, Gloria. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, so much. That was lots of wonderful, wonderful information. And there were some questions in the chat that I think were already answered, but we will go over them a little bit afterward. All right, and now I am going to turn it over to Jamie Lewis. I'm just going to read a brief bio on Jamie. So Jamie is a partner with Birnbaum Lewis, a Long Island-based estate planning firm advising clients in the areas of estate planning, probate, trust administration, elder law, and special needs planning, from protecting minor children to caring for an aging loved one and all life stages in between. Their team helps families navigate the legal complexities of daily life. Jamie, take it away.
Hello there, everybody, and thanks you guys for all being here, and thank you guys for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here and help provide some of this really, be a part of this really important conversation. My colleagues just told you about all of the amazing resources that there are available for people. My job is to talk about how to pay for it. Less of the good news here. What I do, I spend pretty much my entire day, every day, working with families to help them navigate the legal maze of aging for those of us who are lucky enough to do so. And what I tell people from the start is that there's only two ways to do it. There's only two ways to age if you're lucky enough to do it. And one way is to plan, and the other way is to crisis your way through it. And I will tell you that everybody here on the panel tonight is happy to help you in either stage. But I think, jump in if anybody thinks I'm right, if anybody disagrees, but I think we'd all also say that it's less traumatic, less expensive, and just and can involve the person who's aging more if it's done in advance. So what I think a lot of this comes down to that people are talking about this evening is making sure that we're thinking about this in advance so that the most appropriate plans can be put in place for aging in the right place, whatever that is for each family. So I'm going to talk a little bit about paying for long-term care. If I can figure out how to make my slide go forward, look at that. So here's my disclaimer. This is just general information. I'm happy to do a deeper dive on any topics that anybody's interested in. Tonight, my piece is really just an overview of some of the details on paying for long-term care. So we've talked about the various services. What am I talking about when I'm talking about long-term care? We're talking about the kind of care that isn't going to end, right? So remember when Julie said that you can go to a skilled nursing facility, but as a rehab, not forever. Right there's an expectation that you're going to stabilize and then be sent home at some point or send wherever that home is, right? So when we're talking about paying for these long-term care services, what I'm really focusing on are those services that are not expected to end. And those services are generally not paid for by Medicare. That comes often as a surprise to people because, again, you do get some Medicare coverage. And as Jen and Megan discussed earlier, there's some physical therapy, occupational therapy, there's a little bit of home care, housekeeping that can be offered, but that's not really the kinds of things that I'm going to be focusing on. I'm really focusing on the stuff that grows over time, doesn't diminish, isn't expected to end. Okay, so who needs long-term care? We've discussed that a little bit. And there we go. So someone turning age 65 today has an almost 70% chance of needing some type of long-term care services and supports in their remaining years. Now, why is that? As other people have mentioned this evening, well, it's just because we're living longer and there's more opportunity for things to happen and things to go wrong. So on average, people who need long-term care use 3 years worth, women 3.7, men 2.2, women have longer life expectancy. And it's really important to note in terms of the statistics, and I believe Julie mentioned this as well, they are pretty steep. 1 in 3 seniors currently die with Alzheimer's or another form of dementia. So this isn't really something that we can just say, it's not going to be me. The likelihood is that it might be, right? And as I said at the outset, the least traumatic and generally less expensive and less emotional way of dealing with things is from the outset, is trying to plan in advance. So this is just a little chart, because we lawyers love our charts, of the various costs of average costs. And these are federal, not like these are numbers that are done at a national level. I'm happy to provide this to my slides to anybody who'd like them. This is just to give you a general idea of what things cost people, both home care, assisted living, nursing home generally. We're talking Nassau County, New York, and national numbers. Basically, the takeaway, it's not cheap. That's the general takeaway. Okay, so how do you pay for long-term care? Well, there's really only 4 options. Basically, there's 4 options for most of us to be considering. You can pay yourself, right? Private pay. You work hard your whole life, you save your money, and you pay for your care, whether it's an aide at home, an aide in an assisted living, when you go into a nursing home and you pay for your care there, whatever, you can private pay. That represents about 13.5% of long-term care expenses that were paid in 2020. So as you can see, not very many people are paying for their long-term care that way. So then there's long-term care insurance. We're going to talk about a little bit more detail about that. As Mike mentioned, very few people have it. For people who do, it's a godsend. And we'll talk about that in a few more minutes. Medicaid. 42% of the long-term care services in 2020 were paid by Medicaid. Now, you'll notice these numbers don't add up to 100 because what we're not including in here are things like Medicare benefits that pay for some of the shortened benefits. There were COVID relief benefits. And so there's all these other numbers. So this is but just showing us, though, what percentage that Medicaid actually paid. We're going to spend a couple minutes talking about Medicaid as an option, but this isn't a Medicaid presentation, so we're not going to go into tremendous depth about that. What I will say is that I am happy to do so if people are interested in a more deep dive into Medicaid. There's also veteran benefits which we're going to be discussing in a moment. So private pay, not a lot to say about this, not a lot of text on this slide. I'm an attorney, not a financial advisor. My suggestions to people is always to say, we should all be working with our financial advisors to be talking about how we plan to pay for this, right? How do we plan to deal with this? What is our expectation? Again, the best way to manage is to try to be thinking about it in advance. But if we haven't had that ability, we don't have the time, we get caught off guard, whatever the reasons, if we don't plan, often we're in a situation where private pay, you know, 100 grand a year for 3 years isn't something that people can just pull out of thin air. It's a tough one. We all have to be planning for it early. And it's something that, like I said, thinking about it early really helps. Again, if there is no plan in place, everybody on the panel tonight can still help, right? There are still resources and options, so I don't want to freak anybody out. I'm just going through what the choices are in the perfect world when we all have the chances. Okay, let's move to long-term care insurance for a minute. Again, if you've got it, it can be life-saving if you understand it. So a couple things that are important about long-term care insurance. First, it's often prohibitively expensive. Now, there are not a lot of companies that are offering it anymore, right? So if you call up an insurance broker, I don't sell insurance. I'm a lawyer. I'm not an insurance person. I'm just telling you what I learned from my experience dealing with these vehicles and these instruments. So when you talk to an insurance broker and you say, I'd like to buy long-term care insurance, there's two different kinds that you can buy really these days. It wasn't like that 30 years ago. There was only one kind, and that's called a standalone long-term care insurance policy. And it's just long-term care insurance. You need long-term care. You draw on your insurance. You get hit by a bus though, poof, right? It goes up in smoke. It's like your homeowner's insurance. Hopefully you never need it. And then when you no longer have the home, you no longer have the insurance. You paid for it, it's gone. So long-term care insurance, standalone policies, that's what they are. If you never use it, it's gone. If you use it, great. They can be, like I said, they can be prohibitively expensive. Now they're even more expensive and harder to find because very few are even offered. What people are doing more and more these days, and again, shop around, not suggesting any specific things here. Life insurance with a long-term care rider. It's a new type of vehicle that's available for people. It's available to many people who don't think that they would qualify for long-term care. You might be able to get life insurance because sometimes it can be easier to qualify for various statistical actuarial reasons that I am not going to go into. So often you can get a life insurance policy, and then if you say, I'd like to get it with a long-term care insurance rider, what that means is, let's say you have a $400,000 life insurance policy. You get hit by a bus and you pass away, your family would get the payout, whoever it goes to, of your life insurance policy. But let's say you don't get hit by a bus, and instead you live a long life and you're in your 90s, and now you would like some long-term care to pay for either some wonderful home care, for an assisted living facility, for any one of these places on the continuum of care. Well, you can now draw down from your death benefit. Let's say you spend $200,000 on your long-term care, then you get hit by a bus or pass away. Well, now there's $200,000 left of your $400,000 death benefit. If you spend all of it, you spend all of it, and there's nothing left as a death benefit. But the idea being that often when people are younger, they're buying life insurance to help cover their family as income replacement. By the time you're significantly older, fewer people are relying on you for that income replacement, and it can often be exchanged to be able to make sense as a long-term care payout. So it's something to be thinking about. But the other important piece about long-term care insurance, For people who have it already, if we're talking about folks who have it now and are looking to trigger it, or people who are looking to buy, there are things that we need to be concerned about and thinking about when we're looking at long-term care insurance, because not all long-term care insurance policies are the same, right? So what tends to be where the differences come up in the long-term care insurance area? What tends to be the areas? Well, the triggering ADLs. We've talked about ADLs have been mentioned. Those are activities of daily living. There are generally 6. They're generally that we use. It was on my previous slide. Mike mentioned them. My point is not to list them, but to say that check the long-term care insurance policy to see how they define the ADLs. They're not required to define them exactly the same way that when your neurologist is talking about them, you're talking about the same things. One thing that people often find in long-term care insurance policies, remember we were saying, is bathing is one of the things that people need first. Well, guess what is one of the often ADLs that is not included for triggering a long-term care insurance policy? Bathing. So they say you can need help with 2 ADLs, one of which cannot be bathing. So, right, you need to know that in advance so that you're not waiting and relying on this assistance. You also want to know what your coverage limits are, because generally you'll get like a $400,000 policy. Let's say the idea being that it's going to pay out about $100,000 a year for 4 years. Well, that's all well and good. But they're also going to have these things called daily caps, right? Daily payouts. And you want to make sure that that's going to be reasonable, and those are reasonable numbers given what things cost. There's also something called an elimination period. And that's something that really people get stuck on. It's basically a time period where the insurance company says, prove to me that you need it. Pay for it yourself. And so what people will do is they'll say, I need help, but I'm going to wait till it's really, really bad, and then I'm going to apply for the assistance. At which point the insurance company may say, okay, well, now you got to pay for it yourself for 90 days, and then we'll step in. When had they just gotten it for an hour, those 3 months before for 90 days, right, it would have started and they could get the help. So it's really understanding what circumstances allow your policy to kick in. Then the really important piece is an inflation rider. I mean, we all understand what inflation is doing to our paychecks and our pocketbooks these days. So imagine what it does to your long-term care coverage. If you have $400,000 today, and it's supposed to cover $100,000 a year worth of care. Well, that's only in these years' dollars. I don't know what it's going to be in 15 years, but I can tell you you'll be protected if you have an inflation rider on your long-term care insurance policy. Okay, so those are the pieces of the insurance world that I just wanted to point out. As we said, and as we saw from the numbers, most people don't have long-term care insurance. It's not something people have. Please, 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 I beg of you, if you do have long-term care insurance, make sure your family knows about it. It's these horrible stories you always hear about families telling each other that, they struggled and struggled to pay for dad's care. And then when dad passed away, they found the long-term care insurance policy under the mattress. And it's just heartbreaking. So just make sure that your family knows where your policy is if it's something that you have. Okay, Medicaid. 30 seconds or less. Here we go. Medicaid. When we're talking about Medicaid, my job would have been much easier if they had put this in a different part of the health insurance programs, right? And the poverty programs in our laws, but they didn't. I would be much better off if they had called it tomato soup. But they didn't. They put this supplement that's given to seniors to help them pay in their old age. They put it in the poverty program called Medicaid, which makes my job really hard to explain to people who've been working hard their entire lives why they now think they need this poverty program. It's not a poverty program in this context. What we're talking about here is, as I said, a supplement that's available to all folks in New York. These are very state specific, so I'm saying in New York very clearly, if you follow certain planning strategies that the state of New York has outlined and allowed. Why do I say and allowed? Because I want to be very clear. Planning for Medicaid, to be able to access Medicaid, to be able to pay for long-term care services, is not some sort of shenanigans or loopholes or taking advantage. It is actually an available supplement that is being made available easier in New York than almost any other state in the nation. So if you don't take advantage of it here, you're unlikely to be able to take advantage of it anywhere else. New York is one of the easiest places to make it work. So with that said, I just want to take a minute to explain how people generally use Medicaid to pay for these long-term care services. Keep in mind, I could give a long seminar on it. I mean, I could give a day-long seminar on anything just because I talk, but there's a lot to say about Medicaid, right? So I'm going to just do the overview. If anybody's interested in a deep dive, we could do that another time. Okay. Medicaid looks at 2 time periods and 2 areas, right? So Medicaid looks at, in terms of the areas, they're looking about income and they're looking at resources. So how much do you earn and how much do you got? And there are rules. It says you can only earn this much and you can only have this much. Let's talk about the income for a second, really, really quickly, because it's an easy one to plan for in New York, but not other states. New York allows us to use a tool called a pooled income trust. I'm not going to go into any of its details. I only raise it to say that makes it possible and workable to retain your income, spend it on yourself as you age. That's what it does. So Medicaid says you can only have $1,677, but New York allows you this extra step that says, or you can have $10,000 a month, as long as you use this pooled trust to pay those bills for yourself. So income, we can generally manage. Resources, there is a very low asset limit and people freak out. And I try to remind people all the time, New York is very expansive in what it excludes in that number. There's a 30,000 number there. It used to be 16 last year. It pretty much doubled. Don't expect that to happen again. It was basically a one-time adjustment. In New York, we have this $30,000 asset limit, but there's also a lot of things that are excluded. A home with an equity value of up to over $1 million is not counted. An IRA, if you're getting your payout, your required minimum distributions, it's completely ignored. You can still use it to get your income to pay for all your expenses. So there's a lot of ways that New York makes this workable. Best is when you've planned for it in advance, but there's also emergency planning that can always be done if need be. Now, remember how I said there's two areas that it looks at, and there's 2 time periods it looks back. The areas are income and resources. The time period is when you're applying and when you pass away. So when you're applying, we have this look back. Nursing home care, they look back 5 years and they say, did you give away anything that you might have otherwise spent on your care? Because if so, we're going to give you a penalty. I'm not going to go into how long and how it's computed, but they give you penalties if you do transfers and need to go into nursing home within 5 years. We can make it work, right? There's a way that New York has allowed us to plan and strategize so that we can make it happen, but you generally only end up being able to protect about 50% of your assets as opposed to about 100% of your assets if you don't plan. Then nursing home care services, there is currently no look back. So I could win the lottery tomorrow, have a stroke, take my lottery winnings, give them all to Julie, and apply for Medicaid home care next week at the Bristol. But what you need to be aware of is that there is a 30-month look back on the books. Many of us in the community are working very hard to take it off the books, but during COVID, it was passed. It's not going to take effect until at least March of next year. But what does it mean? It means, I'm going to say again what I said at the beginning, planning early is always better in terms of making sure you can can get access to all of the advantages and resources that New York allows. The second time period, in addition to eligibility that we care about, is called estate recovery. There's that big red triangle, right? And that means when you pass away. So that means that we have to be careful about what you own when you pass away, not just when Medicaid looks at your eligibility, because certain things that are exempt when you apply, Medicaid is going to say, let me just have that when you pass away, right? But there are ways that New York allows that other states do not. Medicaid has said, New York has said, we specifically want to allow people to plan for this to protect their assets from Medicaid recovery. And so you can plan for that. Again, if you don't plan, there's really nothing you can do at that point. Anything that's in your estate when you pass away for probate purposes Medicaid has access to recover what they've spent on you. Okay. In the interest of time, I'm going to just run through this quickly. There are veterans pension benefits that are available. This is different from the veterans health insurance. Veterans pension benefits, there are service requirements, there are net worth limits. There's also a relatively new 3-year look back with penalties for uncompensated transfers, similar to the look back in Medicaid that's for 5 years. The other thing with veterans benefits, why it's always important to look into what's available, is because surviving spouses may be eligible, as well as disabled children. So it's a really important benefit to look into if you are a member of an armed service. The last thing I wanted to do before I stop talking is just to do a quick, and I will keep to 30 seconds, Gloria, I promise. Just a quick 30 seconds on advanced directives that you need to have in place so that everything that we've talked about tonight can happen the way you wanted it to, right? Naming people who can make sure things look the way you want as you age. It's the only way to make sure that you can age the way you want to and that you know what to do for those that you're caring for. Healthcare proxy gives a person power to make your healthcare decisions if you cannot. A living will conveys your end of life decisions in terms of withdrawing and withholding life-sustaining treatment. That you can designate that in a living will. A HIPAA authorization. It's this, we've all signed this every time we go to the doctors, but when you go to the doctor and you sign it, you're authorizing that specific medical facility to release your information, not the next rehab you're going to be in or the hospital you go to in the emergency. So you just want to make sure that there's a HIPAA authorization. And then this is a super important one, the last one I'm going to mention, and this is the power of attorney. This is a very important document. You want to make sure that you give it's the authority to act in your place, but it takes effect immediately upon signing it. So you want to make sure that you safeguard this document, but please, please, please make sure that you have one and make sure that it's up to date. Without a power of attorney authorizing somebody else to act on your behalf to do the kind of estate planning that might be needed to access Medicaid, long-term care insurance benefits, your private savings that you saved just for these purposes, somebody needs the power to act on your behalf. It's much easier to spend a couple $100 and put something in place now than to spend $20,000 to $30,000 on a guardianship proceeding down the road if you no longer have capacity to execute this kind of a document. So the two things I just want to close with are to say that planning makes it easier, but everyone in this panel will help you either way in an emergency or planning in advance. And please make sure you have an up-to-date power of attorney. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie, so much. Much appreciated.
My pleasure. I'm just trying to figure out how to stop the screen share.
All right. Thank you to all of our wonderful, wonderful presenters. You have been given such an enormous amount of valuable information that I think will be so significant in helping you all make some life decisions for yourselves. There were a few questions in the chat that I think were answered in the chat. I don't know, Caitlin, did you see any that we could repeat a couple of them that you did see so that everyone who may not have seen them in the chat can see them?
Sure.
If you guys have questions, if you're able to put them in the chat, that's fine. And I think if we don't have that many people, if anybody also wants to then unmute themselves, we can then certainly answer some more questions if they are there. So Caitlin, are there questions that you want to?
So the earlier questions, the first one was, how does a care manager get paid? And the answer was private pay or long-term care insurance. And then there was a question about the link, a website link for the New York voucher program for dementia. And that link was provided under it as a reply.
So Julie did that. But just, Caitlin, just I want to let you guys know that link, because that is an important one, we will try to send that out, or any information that's on there, we will try to put on our JCC website so that you can certainly access that information. Go ahead, sorry.
Great. Someone had asked for Mike's contact information, which he put in. And then folks were curious about the PowerPoint presentations. And Gloria, you had mentioned that if people added their email to the chat, you could send it to them. And you were also, again, as you were just saying, able to put it on the JCC's website for future use.
Correct.
And then I think someone just had a question now about the phone number of the company. I'm not sure which company.
Well, oh, Yehudi asked that. Yehudi, what, do you want to unmute and tell us what that? what
Right.
you're
I,
referring to?
I think that person muted them. The computer got muted again when they were speaking.
Yehudi, just try to unmute yourself and do it again. Can you do it? No? I'm having trouble unmuting myself. All right. Caitlin, I think
Here
that's
it go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead, Yehudi, go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry. I got in late and it was so important, and then my phone number died. So I saw it's 516, but I didn't have a chance to write the full number of the woman, the company, the advisor, the lawyer.
Which one? Oh, the lawyer. You're talking about Jamie?
Right, and both of them, because I didn't hear the first guy, but
Oh, okay. Do you see them? You know what? I'm gonna sign. I have your email. I can send you out their information if that would be
that's
helpful.
very sweet of you. I appreciate. I'm so sorry.
No, sorry. I was
Very good information about Medicaid and everything. I mean, if I can
It's all
use
going to
it.
be on
Thank
our
you.
website. You can access it on the website. Don't worry. We'll be able to put.
I don't know about you're gonna send the link, right?
Yes,
On the
we will.
email.
And I just want to just add, you know, I know a lot of times people come to these, you know, presentations and Jamie did such a great job in quickly talking about Medicaid. But remember that, you know, if you have the ability to pay for care privately, and that typically on Long Island is through the sale of a home that people have lived in for many years, or perhaps even a reverse mortgage, you know, if you decide to stay in your house, that gives you a lot more choices, right? So, you know, Medicaid is not just going to pay for, you know, perhaps the level of care, the type of care that you're looking for, that that meet your expectations, that gives you, you know, the quality of life that you're looking for. So, you know, I'm always trying to just kind of change the way people think that it's okay to spend your money on your care, right? People, you want to leave a legacy to your kids, but you know, it's okay to spend your money on you. You know, once I mentioned before that, you know, my dad lives at a Bristol. He sold his house and that's how he can afford to live at the Bristol. And I'm perfectly fine with that as his daughter, knowing that he's living a great quality of life with the mortgage that he paid for 30 years and the investments that he made. And so I think people need to just start thinking a little bit differently, that, you know, Medicaid shouldn't always just be the default. Oh, we're going to apply for Medicaid, and it's okay to use your investments and use your money to pay for care.
Yeah.
That's my soapbox.
Gloria?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Ellen. Schwartz.
Ellen.
Hi. So are you going to put, I missed Megan Healy's information because I would like to contact her. So you're going to put that out?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's actually in the
Yeah.
chat.
It's in the chat.
Yeah,
Wow.
I'm so ridiculous. I don't know how to get the chat.
Okay, that's all right. I can send Megan's information.
Yeah.
That's not a
Or
problem.
Ellen,
Yeah.
I'll send it to you.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Pam.
but we'll get
Okay.
all this information out to you guys. As many people that put
Okay.
out links, we have them. And if
Yeah.
more people want them,
Yeah.
we'll make sure they get out.
I have a
Thank-
question.
Gloria, I just posted my presentation, the PDF of our slides in the chat in case anybody's interested.
Yeah, but if
I have a
not, you
little
guys can just
question.
send them to me. All of you, just send them to me and then we'll make sure they get posted. Beverly,
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
ahead. Go
I
ahead,
have a question.
Beverly.
I wanted to know if you sell your home and move to one of the facilities, independent assisted living, the money you have that you're going to use to help pay for that, how should you set that up? Should it be in a trust and your trustee manages to help pay to the assisted living or independent living or whatever you choose to use? How should that, from the lawyer's standpoint, how does that work?
So the way you set it up is really up to you. Using a trust is generally a certain, when people talk about a trust when they get older, they're generally talking about one of two things, either a trust to avoid probate or a trust for Medicaid, right? So to determine what kind of trust you need, even if you need a trust at all, it really depends on your specific situation. Generally, though, if you're just going to use your money to pay for your care, you can do it yourself. You just, you'd want to invest the money appropriately with a financial advisor you trust, right? And make sure you understand how long that money is going to last you in that facility and how that's going to work, right? So I just want to separate the trust piece.
But if my husband, who has Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, eventually is going to need Medicaid.
So then you're talking about Medicaid planning on behalf of your husband, and then how you hold it is very different, and what you want to have happen to it when you pass away so that he's not holding it, right? So sounds like when you have a spouse involved and there is going to be a need for something, you really have to do planning that takes that into account. And so it wouldn't be just as simple as selling your house and using the money to pay for the care. You'd want to make sure that you're protecting for your husband so that he doesn't inherit from you in a way that would make it too difficult or impossible for him to get Medicaid. Right. So it has to be part of larger planning.
Wow. Okay.
But let me tell you, that planning has to be done whether or not you sell your house. Right? Let me be clear. It's not
Right,
because
exactly.
you move, you need to sell. But either
gotcha.
way, if you think your husband is going to need Medicaid, you want to make sure that things are set up so that he can do so appropriately.
Well, who knows what tomorrow's going to bring, but right now he has Alzheimer's and Parkinson's.
So we do know part of what tomorrow is going to bring, sadly. And all we can do is put the best supports in place we can for both you and him in the interim.
So we went to a lawyer and they wanted to do a trust at $5,000, and we said no, we want to sell the home and go live somewhere nice in a little place, and maybe we have 8 years, who knows, like you say. But I'm looking at him maybe needing it, but I may go before him, and we're both not well. So these are all the questions that I need a lot of help and answers with. So, Mike, I will need your assistance, your kind of assistance, that's for sure, if I move. But the lawyer part is, I'm so confused as to what the best thing to do is.
Yeah, and I think what the lawyer is concerned about, it sounds to me, Jamie, maybe, is the fact that he might need a nursing home in the future. And so you can still sell the house, move to assisted living now, and also plan and do also Medicaid planning for the future, right? Because you're always
Right.
going to sort of plan for the worst. So that's
what I was thinking of doing.
But the thing is that Medicaid planning for your husband really needs to be done whether or not you move to an assisted living facility. And it doesn't need to be done. It just needs to be thought through. Right? Whether or not people choose to plan is entirely up to them, as long as you understand what the options are, right? So
I may be moving to Massachusetts from New York, so you're.
Well, one of the things to really be clear about is talking to an elder law attorney in Massachusetts, and a Julie and a Mike and a Megan and a Jen in Massachusetts, because what I was going to say is that really what this is it's a team discussion.
Yeah.
Right? Your attorney can't answer any of the planning questions in a vacuum of the medical needs and the projected care needs, which is a Mike question and a medical question with Megan, with the meeting with the doctors, right? So everybody has to have a team meeting to understand
How do I do that? Who do I go to in your group? Can somebody help me with that?
Like, how does
Well, I
she-
mean,
I
I
think
really-
she's asking, how does she start? Like, where do we start? And I can understand how overwhelming that is, Beverly.
Absolutely.
Oh, very
It is very
overwhelming.
So
overwhelming.
there are two places that I would suggest, and Julie, I would also ask that you jump in for this as well. But the first two things, the first thing is to start with somebody like a care manager to help you look at the big picture, the overarching picture. And then there are organizations that are very, very helpful in helping you identify resources that might be good support systems to sort of get started. One of the things that I often send people to is the National Aging in Place. On their website, it's a national nonprofit, and on their website, they have a planning guide. You can print it out for free, and it's a really good place to start in sort of helping you think through what the issues are. And then you can sort of take that and it gives you guided sort of, well, if this is an issue, then here's a next suggested step, right? And there's also an 800 number for our Long Island chapter that will probably be answered by Laura LaFauci, who can really help point you in the direction of a specific next question. But those are my initial thoughts.
Beverly, where do you live?
Yes, and-
What town do
I
you
li-
live in?
I live in Sag Harbor.
You live out in Sag Harbor.
Yeah,
You
we're
know,
gonna
I
go
think
look
the
at the villa, which is assisted living, but it's enhanced. And they will, they look, we're gonna go look, we're gonna see a tour. And then we're looking at the, up in Massachusetts, we have a couple of places we're looking at assisted livings near my daughter. So
Okay, so Beverly, I'm gonna stop because we're gonna, it's
Right.
getting too individual.
you for
We
your-
have
thank
lots of
you.
general questions. But Beverly, that also that's something a social worker can do. You can certainly reach out to any one of us, to me, to
Yes.
Megan as a care manager. We can kind of pool together and we can sort of steer you in a direction of somebody who can kind of start guiding you a little bit. So feel
Okay.
free if you want, Beverly. I think I have your email, I think.
yes, you do. I put
I
it in.
do.
the
Yeah, I
chat.
think you put it in. So I'll email you at least so we can get started a little bit. All right. So don't feel like you're not alone. You're not alone. That's all I'm going to say.
Thank you all.
You're not alone here.
There's,
All right.
yes, and I was just gonna say, yes, Beverly, myself, I happen to be actually doing some work right now in Massachusetts. And through geriatric care management associations, we have lots of connections nationally. So just like Gloria said, you're not alone. We're all here.
Yeah, Jim,
Great.
maybe I'll put you, I have Beverly's email. I'll put you in touch with her.
Absolutely.
You guys can connect.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else have any questions? So now you know there's lots of answers and questions here. Anybody else have any questions? Anybody else?
We call ourselves the village.
That is so true. It is so true.
Yes.
So true. Anybody questions? You can just
I-
yell them out. Go ahead,
I have a
Maxine.
question, Maxine. I live in Binghamton, New York, so my house is not worth enough for me to live very long in a nursing home. But I have long-term care insurance. It helped my parents very much when they were in Florida. I have someone who sold me the policy that I have, and also, since my husband had some medical problems, a lot of medical problems, she was not eligible for a long-term care policy. So she sold me a long-term policy for nursing homes. Have you heard about this?
Yes.
Did I get taken, or how would that help me? He's on Medicaid. Is that something I should continue paying for, or how
Anybody?
will it help him? Because every time I call this woman who sold me the policy, she talks really fast. I come away from it. She's like, "You're fine, you're fine." And I'm spending too much money on this.
Wow. All right. Anybody have thoughts? Anybody?
I mean, I have not heard of a nursing home only policy. I do know, and I noticed that Jen was saying that she had, so maybe
Yes.
you have some additional information about this, but generally speaking, if your advisor is not willing to take the time to explain to you what you have, you might want to talk to somebody who can.
Why I jumped into this meeting here. I thought,
Yeah,
maybe-
and often, often you can switch advisors. They can help you transfer a policy if possible, and transferring advisors, not the policy itself. And there are people who will explain it to you because it's your
Hmm.
specific situation and what the specific policy says that should determine whether or not you should keep paying for it. Often people stop paying for it when it's triggered, right? When you don't need it anymore. So that also comes into play. So it really needs to be looked at.
Yeah.
Well, she's her own company, so there's nobody to transfer to.
No. I think she must work for a company that underwrites the insurance policy, right? There's
Right.
large insurance companies and
Yeah.
brokers sell various companies' policy.
So you think I should go to that company and
You
ask?
could try going to the company, maybe they can describe it to you, they can answer it for you, but I'm always wary of continuing to give money to somebody who won't explain what I'm paying for.
Right.
Jen, do you have some more
And-
information on that kind of? a policy?
I have come across these policies every once in a while when I'm going into someone's home and doing a consult for potential home care services. So I have come across it several times, and ultimately what wound up happening is the long-term care insurance paid for a portion and then it went to Medicaid. So, you know,
Does that-
there's a
does that-
series.
Well, would that open the door to a nursing home? There's just a couple of nursing homes in our area
Yeah.
for Medicaid.
Yeah, well,
They're
it
not
can.
good
I
facilities.
think maybe potentially if planning wasn't done, that's where sometimes that policy might be helpful in terms of covering the costs, some of the costs. So sometimes that could be a tool, but I'm happy. I do insurance verification, so I'm happy if you ever wanted to get on a call, you know, as long as you have the permission to speak, we can do a deep dive, a little bit of a deeper dive, see if there's any clauses to it or anything like that. I call them like insurance information gathering sessions, and we can just go down the list to try to get a deeper dive on your policy if you feel like you're not getting phone calls back from the person who sold the policy to you.
She also doesn't get along with my lawyer, so it's really tricky.
Complicated.
And my husband has finally gotten care at home through Medicaid, because that's why we put him on Medicaid, because I went through all my savings, private pay for a year and a half.
I'm sorry.
And I just need to know about this. So what is your name?
Sure. So my name is Jen Devine. And
How do you spell your last name?
it's Devine.
Okay.
And
When I have your information, I can send you Jen's information.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Just gonna write that down so I don't.
Perfect.
All
Next.
right, I think we're at that time. Am I correct? Looks like it to me. I think we've actually gone over our time.
Mhm.
Uh,
So much
This
to
is-
talk about.
Yeah, I'm telling you, it really is a lot to talk about. We may end up having to do a part 2, guys, because we have
Mhm.
so much to say and there's so many questions. But I think we're going to wrap it up for tonight. We are going to try to get some of this information on our website. We've recorded the program so that you can review some of the information. I hope that we at least started yourself thinking about all the various options that you have and that you're not locked in, that there are many choices. But I think one of the primary takeaways, I think, is that you can't wait to think about this. That this involves planning. This involves thought. So I don't want you to walk away from this and say, well, I'll wait till, I'll wait till a rainy day occurs. It's raining. I promise you, it's already raining and we need to be thinking about it. So everyone have a good rest of summer. Enjoy yourselves. Remember, we do have a program tomorrow for those of you that have Parkinson's. We have an in-house program at the JCC and want to wish you all well. All right. Well, thanks. And thank you to all the presenters. for all your
Thank
help.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night,
I
everybody.
thought it was
Bye.
excellent. Yeah.
Night.
Thanks so much. Take care, everyone.
Good night.
Night.